I never thought the sound of a ballpoint pen could be the soundtrack to the end of a man's life. Just a little click, almost nothing. But I've heard it in my dreams ever since, over and over. That day, my son Henry took me to the bank, and me, naive as a kid, I figured he was just doing it to help me out. "It's just to update some information, Pop," he said, smiling. He had that nice, patient tone kids use when they stop seeing you as a man and start seeing you as a burden they have to manage. I was wearing my good jacket, the gray wool one, the same one Rose gave me the winter before she passed. This wasn't just any day. Inside, I actually felt something like pride. My son had called me early, he'd picked me up, opened the car door for me, and even asked if I wanted to listen to the radio. It had been a long time since he'd shown me those little kindnesses. On the drive over, he told me about his job, how well everything was going, about his plans with Laura, his wife, and about their idea to buy a bigger house. "For when you need to come stay with us, old man." That line made me smile. I thought that after all the heartache, life was finally giving me back a little tenderness. When we got to the bank, everything was bright, modern, impersonal. The air smelled like expensive perfume and fresh ink. A young woman in a blue uniform helped us, and Henry did all the talking. "I'm here with my father to update his account. Just some routine paperwork." She nodded, not suspecting a thing. I sat next to him, watching how confident he was, and I felt small, useless. I didn't understand these papers anymore, these computer screens, these words that sounded like a foreign language. I just saw my son's hands moving with certainty, signing, pointing, checking. At one point, the employee passed me some documents. "Sign right here, Mr. Miller." I looked at Henry, and he nodded with a calm smile. "It's just an update, Pop. Don't worry." So I signed. I signed without reading a single word. I signed with that blind faith a father has, the kind that still believes love is stronger than suspicion. When I looked up, my son had a strange expression, a mix of relief and something else. It wasn't pride, it wasn't affection, it was satisfaction. That little smirk barely lasted a second, but it was enough for a shadow to cross my soul. I couldn't explain it, but something inside me clenched. "Is that everything?" I asked. "Yep, Pop," he said. "That's everything." We left the bank. The midday sun reflected off the glass, and the air felt colder. On the way back, Henry was quiet, distracted, and I, not knowing why, didn't want to break the silence. I just stared out the window, watching the city pass by. A city I once knew, but that now felt foreign. The new buildings, the billboards, the people rushing around. Everything was changing. Except, apparently, my own gullibility. When we got to my house, he gave me a pat on the shoulder. "Thanks for coming with me, old man," he said. "Coming with you?" I asked, confused. He smiled, that practiced kindness again. "Yeah, of course. I'll call you later, okay? I've got to make a few calls." And he left. Just like that. I stood at the door, watching his car disappear down the street. The sound of the engine faded, and the silence wrapped around me again, the way it always does since Rose left. I went inside. The dining room clock said 2 in the afternoon. The house smelled like old soup and loneliness. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the backyard. The apple tree was still holding on to its last few apples, stubborn and red despite the coming winter. I remembered Rose, her small hands peeling one of those apples, laughing at my clumsy attempts to help in the kitchen. "You're a genius with wood, Frank, but you're useless with a kitchen knife," she'd say, laughing. That voice still kept me company, like a soft echo in the long afternoons. As I drank my coffee, I couldn't stop thinking about Henry's smile. There was something about it that bothered me. Too satisfied, too quick. But I pushed the thought away. Trusting him was the only thing I had left. After all, he was my son. And parents, even when they're hurt, always find an excuse to keep believing. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you've subscribed to the channel and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me know that you support what I do and enjoy the stories I put my heart into preparing. Tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. Okay, let's get back to it. That night, the phone rang. It was a voice I didn't recognize. "Mr. Frank Miller?" "Yes, this is him. Sir, I'm calling from Central Trust Bank." We just wanted to confirm if you authorized the total transfer of your assets into the name of your son, Mr. Henry Miller. The world stopped. What did you say? I asked, a tremor starting deep in my stomach. Yes, sir. The transfer was processed this morning. Would you like to receive a copy of the signed agreement? I don't remember exactly what I answered. I just remember the coffee mug slipping from my hand, the floor seeming to move under my feet, and the air suddenly becoming too heavy to breathe. I walked to my desk, pulled open the drawer, and looked for the envelope I'd brought back from the bank. I tore it open, and there were the papers, my signature, my name, and right next to it the words, "Final transfer of assets. My house, my savings, my entire life, now in my son's name." I sank to the floor. My hands were shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't even yell. I just felt an emptiness so huge that for a second I thought my heart would stop. I looked around at everything I had built with years of hard work. The furniture I'd carved with my own 2 hands, the photos from my wedding, the paintings Rose had done. Nothing was mine anymore. Nothing. And as the night fell, I understood something that chilled me to the bone. My son hadn't taken me to the bank to help me. He'd taken me there to erase me. I didn't sleep that night. The clock said 3 a.m. when I finally gave up and switched on the dining room lamp. The silence in the house was so heavy that every creak in the floorboard sounded like a confession. I had the papers spread out on the table under the yellow light. I'd read them over and over, still not understanding how something like this could have happened right in front of me. My name was there. My signature was there. It all looked perfectly legal. The document stated it clearly. Irrevocable transfer of real estate and bank funds to new title holder, Henry Miller. Irrevocable. That one word cut right through me like a knife. Not a judge, not begging, not a single tear could give me back what was mine. For years I worked as a carpenter. I wasn't rich, but every nail I hammered, every table I sold, meant one less night of hunger, one less debt, one promise kept to Rose. We built this house together with our own hands. She painted the walls while I measured the lumber. It was our dream. And now, in a single day, my son had made it his property, without even blinking. At 6 a.m, as the first ray of sun hit the window, I decided to call him. I picked up the phone with a shaking hand. It rang 4 times before he answered. "Dad?" he said, his voice thick with sleep. "Henry, I need to talk to you." "This early? What's wrong? What did you do?" I asked him straight out. There was a short, awkward silence. "What are you talking about?" "The bank, the transfer. They called me last night. I signed something I didn't understand. You told me it was just an update." "Oh, that," he said, his tone casual. "Dad, it was necessary. Don't worry about it so much." I felt the anger rising inside me, slow, like a flame growing out of control. "Don't worry? You took everything from me, Henry. The house, my savings." "Dad, listen," he interrupted. "You can't handle that kind of paperwork anymore. You forget things, you get confused. I'm just helping you." "Helping me?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "By taking the only thing I have?" He let out an impatient sigh. "Look, old man, don't be dramatic. You're still going to live there. Nobody's kicking you out. It's just that things are in my name now. It's safer this way." "Safer for who, Henry? For you?" The line was quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard his voice, cold and distant. "Dad, just accept that you're old. I did it for your own good." And he hung up. I stood there holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone. That was the first time I truly felt like I didn't have a son anymore. The same little boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the one who used to fall asleep with his arm draped over mine when he had nightmares. He'd become someone who saw me as a loose end to be tied up. I put the phone back, turned off the light, and went out to the backyard. The air was freezing, but I didn't care. I sat under the apple tree, the one I'd planted the day Henry was born. I remember Rose, her hands covered in dirt, laughing as she told me, "Let them grow up together, Frank. The tree and the boy." And they did. Every year the apple tree bloomed. I saw my son's life in it, his growth, his stages, his successes. Now, looking at its bare winter branches, I understood that they had both changed. One had given fruit, the other only thorns. I spent the morning sitting there, staring at the gray sky, trying not to think. But the mind is cruel. It forces you to replay the moments that broke you over and over. I remembered when Henry asked for help paying for college. I sold my best tools so he could get his degree. I remembered the pride I felt when he brought home his diploma. "This is yours too, Pop," he told me back then. "It's amazing how easy it is to forget what you promised when you don't need anything anymore." Mid-afternoon, someone knocked on the door. It was Laura, his wife. She was holding a bag of groceries and an awkward smile. "Henry asked me to bring you this." "Ah, how kind," I said, my voice dripping with irony. "Did he also tell you that I'm living on his charity now?" Her face changed. "Don't start, Frank. He just wants to help." "Help me?" I said, raising my voice. "He stole my house, Laura." She looked down. "Don't look at it like that. He's young. He has responsibilities. And I'm old. But I have a memory. I have my dignity," I shot back. "And you don't sign that away on a piece of paper." Laura didn't know what to say. She left the bag on the table and left without saying goodbye. The slam of the front door echoed through the house as if it were sealing off whatever was left of our family. That night, silence was my only companion again. I sat in front of the papers, trying to make out the fine print, but my eyes were blurring. Exhaustion, anger, sadness. It was all mixing together. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. It seemed the tears had abandoned me too. I walked to the bedroom and opened the nightstand drawer. In it was an old notebook where Rose used to keep track of her household expenses. Tucked between the pages, I found a note she'd written years ago. "Frank, don't ever let love make you blind. Real love doesn't hurt." I read that sentence a dozen times, and in that moment, I understood. I hadn't just lost a house or some money. I had lost the love of a son who no longer saw me as a father, but as a piece of unfinished business. I turned off the light. As the cold seeped in through the windows, I made a silent promise. I was not going to let that signature be the end of my story, because if life, and Rose, taught me anything, it's that dignity isn't something you can sell or inherit. It's something you defend. There's no sadder sound than a key turning in the lock of your own front door when you know it's not yours anymore. Henry showed up at dusk, his face calm as if nothing had happened. He had his phone in one hand, his suit still looking sharp from the office. I was waiting for him in the living room with the papers on the table. The clock said 6:30, and the golden afternoon light was pouring through the window, bathing the room in a calm that didn't belong to me. "We need to talk," I said without raising my voice. He didn't even look at me. "I'm tired, Pop. Can we do this tomorrow?" "No," I said, firm. "It's today." He dropped his keys on the little table by the door and let out an exaggerated sigh. "If you're going to start with the drama, I'd rather not hear it." "Drama?" I asked, trying to steady my hands. "Is that what you call robbing your own father?" His expression changed. For the first time, I saw him get angry. He crossed his arms and smiled, arrogant. "Don't exaggerate. I didn't steal anything. I just did what was best for everyone." "For everyone or for you?" I asked. "Or does everyone just mean you and Laura? Because I don't remember being part of that decision." Henry walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. "Dad, you're getting paranoid. I didn't want to hurt you. I did it to protect you." Those words hurt me more than any insult. Protect me, as if I were a child, as if I didn't have a history, a voice, a will of my own. I stood up slowly. My body didn't obey me like it used to, but the anger gave me strength. "I gave you everything, Henry. Everything. I worked until my hands split open, until my back bent like old wood. And this is how you repay me? With paperwork and lies?" He turned around, tired of listening. "Dad, that's enough." "No, I'm not finished," I said, slapping the table. "You didn't just sign those papers with me, son. You signed my death certificate." He was quiet for a few seconds. Then, without a shred of guilt, he said the words that broke my soul. "You're old, Dad. You don't need a house or a bank account. You just need a quiet corner to die in." I felt the air leave my lungs, not because of the cruelty of his words, but because of the coldness. He said it without hate, without emotion, as if he truly believed it was the right thing to do. "Is that what you think of me?" I whispered. He shrugged. "That's life. Things change. I have a family now, responsibilities. I can't keep carrying you." I just stared at him. For a second, I saw the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders for miles when he hurt his leg. I saw the young man who cried when his mother died, the one I promised to care for, to protect, to guide. And now that same son was looking at me the way you look at a piece of old furniture that's in the way. You know what the worst part is, Henry? What? It's that I don't even hate you. I just pity you. His expression faltered. For the first time, I saw him get nervous, not because of what he'd done, but because I wasn't reacting the way he expected. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't curse him. I just looked at him, calm, and that calm unsettled him. Huh? I walked toward him, slowly. My voice was a thread, but it was firm. Listen to me closely, son. You took my house, my money, my memories. But there is one thing you can never, ever take from me. My dignity. And believe it or not, one day you're going to need to come back here. And when you do, I promise you, you will remember every single word you said today. Henry tried to laugh. Is that a threat? No, a promise. I grabbed my coat, Rose's old wool scarf, and walked to the door. Before I left, I looked at him one last time. Enjoy your house, Henry. But I'll warn you, these bricks aren't going to love you back the way I did. I closed the door without looking back. Outside, the air was freezing and the sky was getting dark. The streetlights were flickering on, one by one. I walked with no destination, my heart in pieces, but my soul on fire. Because in spite of everything, in that instant, I knew one thing. I was not going to let this betrayal define my end. I stopped at the neighborhood park. On the bench where Rose and I used to sit, the wind was swirling the dry leaves. I sat down, took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, I prayed. Not for me, for him. For the son who had gotten lost in his own selfishness, and who, sooner or later, would understand what he had done. There is no worse punishment than the weight of regret. And I, though wounded, knew how to wait. My whole life had been about patience, and now that same patience would be my weapon. It's a funny thing. He took my house, but without knowing it, he'd set me free from everything that tied me to the past. What Henry didn't know was that my story didn't end there. There was still one detail he'd overlooked, a small clause in that contract that would change everything. That night when I came back, I stood at the front door. The house was dark. I didn't feel like I owned it, but I could still go inside. I went up to my room, opened the nightstand drawer, and found an old yellowed folder. It was the original mortgage contract. And there, in tiny print, was a sentence that made me smile for the first time in days. The original title holder shall retain right of use and occupancy in the event of abuse or eviction by the beneficiary. I had to laugh. My son had forgotten to read the fine print, and that fine print was my revenge. Sometimes you can live in your own house and feel like a stranger. From that day on, every corner of my home reminded me that it wasn't mine. The pictures were still on the walls, the furniture was in its place, but something invisible had broken. It was as if the air itself had a new owner. Henry and Laura moved in a week after our confrontation. They brought boxes, new furniture, modern curtains. She walked through the halls giving orders with the same ease that I, for 40 years, had cared for every brick in that place. They didn't ask me if I wanted to stay. They just assigned me a room, the smallest one, down the hall, next to the laundry room. "You'll be more comfortable there, Pop," Henry said. "Close to the bathroom, everything handy." I didn't answer. I just nodded. Because sometimes silence isn't resignation. It's strategy. The room smelled damp and like old paint. The window barely let in any light. There was a simple bed, a small table, and a chair. Nothing else. I put my few belongings in a box, a photo of Rose, a notebook, my glasses, and the folder with the bank contract, my secret, my shield. The first few days were a kind of limbo. I'd hear Laura laughing from the kitchen, Henry talking on the phone, the clinking of glasses at dinner parties I was no longer invited to. I ate my dinner alone, in silence, long after they'd gone to bed. The ticking of the clock was my only company. Sometimes I'd go out to the backyard when everyone was asleep. The apple tree was still there, faithful and quiet. I'd put my hand on its trunk and talk to it as if it could hear me. "Rose, if you could see this," I'd whisper. The tree was the only thing that still smelled like my old life. One night, as I was putting away my mug, I heard Laura say from the dining room, "We can't keep on like this, Henry. Your father looks at us like we owe him something." "And don't we?" he asked, irritated. "You gave him a roof over his head. What more does he want?" "I don't know, but sometimes he scares me." I smiled to myself from my little corner. It wasn't fear she should be feeling. It was guilt. And guilt, I knew, is a silent sickness that always gives itself away. In the mornings, I'd pretend to read the newspaper while I watched their routines. Laura left early, smelling of expensive perfume, a satisfied woman's smile on her face. Henry left later, leaving his dirty mug on the counter. When the house was empty, I could breathe. Only then could I feel free, even if just for a few hours. I'd dust, make my coffee, walk the halls. It wasn't my house anymore, but I still knew it better than anyone. Every crack, every floorboard that creaked, every loose screw on the staircase. And in that knowledge, I found my refuge. One afternoon, I decided to go down to the basement. I hadn't been down there in years. The smell of old wood wrapped around me immediately. The shelves were still full of boxes of tools, memories, and folders. I searched through the papers until I found what I was looking for. The original copy of the mortgage, signed decades ago. At the bottom, in tiny print, was the same clause I'd seen at the bank. I read it slowly, savoring every word. The original holder will retain full right of ownership if the assignee commits acts of neglect, mistreatment, or unjust eviction of the assigner. There it was, my salvation. That tiny sentence was a seed, and I knew just how to make it grow. I put the document in an envelope and hid it under a loose floorboard. Then I went up to the backyard, took a deep breath, and looked at the sky. Rose used to say that patience is the good man's revenge. I'd always been a good man, and now, for the first time, that goodness was going to be my weapon. The days grew long. Henry avoided looking at me. When our eyes met, he'd pretend to be in a hurry. Laura, on the other hand, treated me with a tense politeness, the kind you use on a stranger you don't want around. One day, while they were eating lunch, I heard her say, "Henry, we should sell this house. With the money, we could buy something more modern." "What about my father?" he asked. "We can rent him a room somewhere. He barely leaves his room anyway." Her son didn't answer. He just looked down. That night, I saw him drink more than usual. The wine gave him the courage not to face his own shame. One afternoon, while I was sweeping the patio, he approached me. "Pop," he said, his voice tired, "I want you to know this isn't personal." "What isn't?" "Everything. The house, the papers, this distance. It's just, things change." "Things do, yes," I answered, "but people choose how they change." He looked down. "I don't want to fight anymore." "Me neither, son. Then just understand me." "Oh, I understand you perfectly," I said calmly. "And believe me, one day you'll understand yourself too." His confusion was obvious. He didn't know if I was forgiving him or warning him, and I enjoyed that. That night before bed, I opened the notebook where I wrote my thoughts. I wrote a single sentence. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's planning. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. In the dark, I could hear Henry and Laura arguing upstairs. It wasn't laughter anymore. It was blame. Money doesn't buy peace, I thought, or love, or a clear conscience. The apple tree was visible through the window, lit by the moon. Its leaves moved slowly, as if applauding in silence, and I fell asleep with a small smile, knowing that, without even suspecting it, my son was living in a house that was, legally, still mine. All I had to do was wait for the right moment, and I, old or not, still knew how to wait. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you a question. Tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far, and what you would do in my place, because believe me, no betrayal hurts more than the one that comes from your own blood. I sometimes wonder how many fathers are listening to me right now, and how many of them have also been forgotten by their own children. Old age doesn't hurt in the bones. It hurts when you realize that the ones you swore to raise with love don't even recognize you anymore. But don't click away, because what's coming next will give you goosebumps. Okay, let's continue. It was a gray Sunday. The house smelled like coffee and expensive perfume. Laura had organized a brunch with some friends of hers, people with easy smiles and empty eyes, and I, as usual, was not invited. From my corner, I listened to the laughter, the toasts, the sound of silverware on plates. There was music, conversation, and that fake atmosphere you find in houses where people pretend to have more than they really feel. I decided to go out to the backyard. The air was heavy, as if the sky was also tired of pretending. I sat under the apple tree, watching the leaves fall slowly onto the damp earth. I had the contract hidden in my coat pocket. It was my secret, my last card to play. While I was thinking, I heard voices from inside the house. I didn't mean to listen, but walls are traitors when you live in silence. The words find you, even if you don't want to hear them. "So it's decided then," Laura said with enthusiasm. "We spoke to the real estate agent and he agrees. The house will sell fast." "I don't know, Laura," Henry answered. "I don't want problems with my father." "Problems?" She laughed. "Please, that old man barely leaves his room. He won't even understand what's happening." There was a silence. Then she added, in a lower voice, "Besides, the notary already checked the papers. Everything is in your name. Legally, there's nothing he can do." A chill ran down my spine. My hands trembled, but not from fear. It was anger, a cold, quiet, sharp anger, the kind of anger that doesn't scream, it plans. I stood up slowly, went back to my room, and closed the door. I took the envelope with the contract and spread it out on the bed. The clause was right there, waiting for me, like a loaded gun. I knew what I had to do. I just had to wait for them to make the first move. The next few days were a farce. Henry and Laura pretended everything was normal, but I could see they were anxious. They spoke in low voices, made secret phone calls, and reviewed documents in the dining room. I watched them without saying a word. It was like watching two thieves digging their own grave without even realizing it. One morning, Henry came to my door. "Pop, I need to ask you a favor," he said, faking kindness. "The notary needs to verify your signature on some papers to close out a file. Could you come with me tomorrow?" "Another file?" I asked without looking up from the book I was pretending to read. "Yeah, it's just a formality." "Ah, like the last one," I replied, smiling calmly. His face tensed up. He didn't say anything else and left. I just watched the door close slowly. The game had begun. That night, I went to the basement. I opened an old toolbox and took out a black-covered notebook. It was my old contact book, where I'd written down the names of old clients, friends, and among them, the name of the lawyer who helped me with the mortgage all those years ago. Mark Sullivan. An honest man. One of the few left. I called him first thing the next day. His voice sounded the same as always, firm, clear, direct. "Frank? Frank Miller? It's been a long time. To what do I owe the honor?" "I need your help, Mark. It's delicate." "Your son?" "Yeah." There was a long silence. "Come see me this afternoon," he finally said, "and bring every document you have." When I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. I was no longer a cornered old man. I was a man who had found the thread of his own justice. I spent the rest of the day getting everything ready, the papers, the contract, my notes, and as I was putting the envelope away, I heard Henry yell from the living room. "Laura, the agent says we have a buyer. They want to see the house this weekend," she yelled back, euphoric. "Perfect, as soon as possible." I smiled in silence, because what they didn't know was that this buyer would never sign anything. The moment I activated that clause, the bank would block any attempt to sell. All I needed was proof. One single action to demonstrate that they had tried to evict me or deceive me. And in their greed, they were about to hand it to me. I didn't sleep that night. The moon filtered through the window, and the air smelled like steel and revenge. I took a sheet of paper from my notebook and wrote, "Rose, my love, don't worry. I'm not going to get my hands dirty, but I'm going to get justice for me, for you, and for every betrayed parent who swallowed their tears in silence." I put the note in the drawer, turned off the light, and closed my eyes. The sound of Henry and Laura's laughter drifted down from upstairs. They had no idea that every laugh was just another nail in their own coffin. The clock struck midnight, and from my empty corner, I whispered to the air, "The house isn't for sale, son. The house is being defended." The next morning was clear, with a shy sun that barely touched the leaves of the apple tree. I put on my old coat, the one Rose had mended so many times, and tucked the envelope with the documents into the inside pocket. I wasn't shaking. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't fear moving me. It was a new kind of calm, the kind that only comes when you have nothing left to lose. Mark Sullivan's office was exactly the same as it was 20 years ago. The same green lamp on the desk, the shelves full of law books and dust, and that smell of old paper that I always liked. When I walked in, he looked up and smiled. "Frank Miller, I thought you'd given up fighting the world by now." "Not the world, Mark," I said. "Just my son." We shook hands. His grip was still firm, though his gray hair showed that time had caught up to him too. We sat down across from each other. I took out the envelope and placed it on his desk. "I need you to read this," I said. Mark opened the envelope, adjusted his glasses, and began to review the documents in silence. Several minutes passed before he looked up. His brow was furrowed, his lips pressed tight. "Your son made you sign this. Without you reading it?" I nodded. "He used the excuse of updating my information." "Son of a," he muttered under his breath. "This is a total transfer, Frank. The house, savings, everything. But," and at that moment, his tone changed. "There's something here." He leaned over the paper, pointing with his finger at an almost invisible line at the end of the document. "Look at this. The assignee shall forfeit all acquired rights if they fail in the duty of maintenance, protection, or harmonious cohabitation with the assigner." He looked up at me, a mix of admiration and surprise on his face. "This, my friend, is your salvation." "Does that mean I can get it back?" I asked. "It means you never really lost it. We put this clause in, at your insistence, when we did the mortgage, remember? We added it to protect you in case of abuse. And what your son did," he added, his voice firm, "is exactly that." I felt a wave of heat rush through my chest. Mark continued, "If he tries to sell the house or evict you, all it will take is a formal complaint, filed with this contract, and the transfer will be voided immediately. The bank and the county registrar won't be able to do a thing. Everything will revert to your name." I listened in silence. Every word was like a drop of water on the dry stone I had for a heart. I didn't answer right away. Mark watched me. "What are you going to do, Frank?" "Wait," I said, almost in a whisper. "Wait for him to dig his own legal grave." That afternoon, I returned home with a serenity I hadn't felt in years. Laura and Henry were in the living room, reviewing papers with the real estate agent. They didn't see me come in. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening. "So, we sign this Friday?" the agent asked. "Yes," Laura replied. "My father-in-law has no say in it. Everything is in Henry's name." "Perfect," the man said, closing his briefcase. "I'll send over the preliminary contract tomorrow." I slipped away without them noticing. I went to my room, closed the door, and took out the contract from Mark. I left it on the table and smiled. Not a happy smile, but the bitter smile of a man who has seen too much and knows that time is on his side. I poured myself a glass of wine. I made a silent toast, looking at the apple tree's reflection in the window. "This is for you, Rose," I murmured, "for every broken promise that starts to mend today." The next day, I went back to Mark's office. He had prepared everything: a notarized affidavit, a signed declaration, and a legal brief. "With this," he said, "when they try to sell, the bank system will flag the contract as contested and any movement will be frozen." "And they'll know?" "Not until they try." "Perfect," I smiled. "I want them to learn what it feels like to lose something without warning, just like it happened to me." Before I left, Mark put a hand on my shoulder. "Frank, don't let revenge take away what little soul you have left." "It's not revenge, Mark." "Then what is it?" "Justice. And sometimes justice has to wear a silent disguise." That night, Laura made pasta and opened a bottle of wine. She seemed happy. I sat in my corner listening to the conversation. "The buyer's coming tomorrow," she said. "We're almost there." Henry was smiling, but his laugh was nervous. "I just don't know if it's the right thing to do." "Oh, please, Henry," Laura snapped. "We'll pay off all our debts with this money. Your father will be fine. We'll find him a nice, quiet place." My son didn't answer. He just looked down and drank his wine in silence. Maybe a part of him still remembered that this house wasn't built with money, but with sacrifice. But ambition has a funny way of numbing the conscience. When they went to bed, I went down to the dining room. I lit a candle and looked around. The walls, the ceiling, the smell of the wood. All of it held my history. I ran my hand over the doorframe and felt the notches I'd made with my own tools. Every scratch was a memory, an effort, a promise kept. "Rose," I whispered to the air, "if you're watching me, give me strength, not to hate, but to watch those who forgot what it means to love fall." At dawn, Henry got up in a hurry. I watched him put on his jacket, check his papers, and leave without looking at me. Laura followed him minutes later. I waited a while, and when the silence filled the house again, I went to the window. The apple tree was shining in the first light. The dew dripped from its leaves like tiny tears. I smiled. I knew that before this day was over, my son was going to run into something he didn't expect. Mid-afternoon, the phone rang. It was Mark. "Frank, it just happened." "What happened?" "They tried to register the sale. The system automatically blocked the operation. The bank will be notifying them of the reversion in the next few hours." "And my son? He's probably in shock right about now." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, dry but clean laugh, not from malice, but from relief, because justice, when it arrives without a sound, is louder than any scream. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Today, I didn't win a war. I just won back the right to die in peace under my own roof." And as the wind rustled the branches of the apple tree, I fell asleep, certain that the first act was over. But the story wasn't. There was still one more lesson to teach my son, that what is stolen with deceit is lost with shame. They say old men are slow. Maybe they're right. But what the young folks forget is that slowness can also be a form of strategy. The man who moves slowly observes, and the man who observes learns how to strike without raising his hand. After Mark called to confirm the bank had blocked the sale, I didn't feel euphoric. I felt peaceful, a strange, quiet peace, the kind that feels more like a warrior's rest than a man's victory. I'd gotten my house back, but that was just the beginning. My son didn't know anything yet, and I had no intention of telling him. The real punishment wasn't taking something from him. It was letting him discover for himself what he had lost. The next few days, I pretended to be sick. I stopped shaving, I ate very little, and I walked slowly. Laura, though she avoided me, started leaving my meals at the door to my room, maybe out of guilt or just convenience. Henry, on the other hand, barely said a word to me. I'd see him out of the corner of my eye, worried, irritable. He spent hours on the phone, arguing with someone from the bank, and every time he hung up, his face was a little more twisted. "Is something wrong, son?" I asked him one afternoon, faking innocence. "Nothing," he said flatly. "Just paperwork, work stuff." "Ah," I murmured with a slight smile. "I thought it might have to do with the house." He looked at me, suspicious. "What do you know about it?" "Nothing, son," I answered. "I'm just an old man who signs things without reading them." His expression hardened. He didn't say anything else, but I understood that the sentence had stung him. And for me, that was enough. That same night, I went out to the backyard. The air was cool and the apple tree smelled like life. I sat under its branches, my notebook on my lap, and I started to write what I called the patience plan. It wasn't a plan to destroy my son. It was a plan to hand him back his mirror, to make him see himself as he truly was, a man who had sold his soul for a stack of papers and a little bit of power. In my notebook, I wrote down 3 steps. The silence. Say nothing. Pretend to be resigned. Let him believe he's won. The mirror. Give him his own words back, but without yelling. Let him hear his own contempt reflected. The lesson. Make him understand that the things he took from me, my house, my peace, my respect, only had value because I was the one who gave them. When I finished writing, I took a deep breath. The wind was blowing softly, and for a second, I thought I heard Rose's voice in the leaves. Do it with love, Frank. Even the purest justice loses its meaning if it's born from hate. I smiled. She was right. My revenge wouldn't be bitter. It would be clean. The next day, Henry came home earlier than usual. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. "Dad," he said from the doorway, "I need to talk to you." "Of course, son," I said. "Sit down." He sat across from me, but wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm having a problem with the bank," he finally admitted. "They're saying there was an error with the transfer, that it's under review." "Gee, a review?" I asked, pretending to be surprised. "And what does that mean?" "I don't know yet, but it could affect the documents." "Huh," I murmured. "That's strange. The papers seemed so solid when I signed them." He looked at me, suspicious. "Do you know something about this?" "Me?" I laughed. "No, son, you know me. I'm just a clumsy old man who signs things without reading them." His brow furrowed. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to make sense of something he couldn't grasp, but I didn't say another word. Silence is a knife that cuts deepest when you use it slowly. In the following days, I started to move differently. Every time Henry came into the room, I'd pretend to be asleep. Every time he asked if I needed anything, I'd answer in a weak voice. "Don't you worry, son. I don't need much anymore." One night, while he was arguing with Laura in the hallway, I heard his voice crack. "I don't understand what's happening. The bank froze everything. They said there's a clause that invalidates the transfer." "What clause?" she yelled. "You told me you checked everything." "Shut up," he snapped back. "It wasn't my fault." I covered my mouth so I wouldn't laugh, because even though they didn't know it yet, their downfall had just begun. 3 days passed. The atmosphere in the house was thick, heavy. Laura stopped speaking to me entirely, and Henry paced back and forth like a caged animal. Until one afternoon, he burst into my room without knocking. "What did you do, Dad?" he yelled. I looked at him calmly. "Me? Nothing. I just signed what you gave me." "Don't play innocent. The bank froze my accounts, canceled the sale, and says the assets are under review. Explain that." "Ah, so it was true," I said, feigning surprise. "I thought it was just work stuff." He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not anger. Fear. "You set me up?" he asked, his voice trembling. "No, son," I answered with a sad smile. "You set yourself up. You just forgot to read the rules of the game." He stormed out, slamming the door. I heard his violent footsteps down the hall, the yelling with Laura, the slam of his car door as he peeled out, and I was left alone. But for the first time, that loneliness didn't hurt. It was mine. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Justice doesn't always show up in a uniform. Sometimes it enters silently, with the smile of an old man who has already lost everything." I went to bed with that sentence in my head. I slept peacefully, and I dreamed of Rose smiling by the apple tree, telling me, "It's almost over, Frank. All that's left is the final blow." The breeze came through the window, cold but sweet, and I knew she was right. My son hadn't learned his lesson yet, but he would, very soon. Sometimes you don't have to move a single piece to win the game. You just have to wait for the other player, in their desperation, to knock over their own pieces. That's exactly what happened. Henry hadn't slept in days. I could hear him pacing the hall at midnight, opening and closing drawers, making hushed phone calls. Laura was barely speaking to him. The tension between them was a poison you could breathe in the air. I felt it, I smelled it, and I savored it in silence. One night, when I went to the backyard for some air, I saw him in the living room. He was on the phone, his voice agitated, almost begging. "Listen, I can't wait any longer. The bank blocked the funds, but there are other ways. Yes, I understand the risk, but I need the money." He paused, then lowered his voice. "No, Laura doesn't know anything about it. She doesn't need to find out." I stood perfectly still in the shadows, listening to every word. I knew that call was the beginning of the end. My son, the one who stole everything from me, was now about to deceive his own wife to try and sell the house illegally, and that decision would be his downfall. The next day, Laura left early. I went down to the dining room and found Henry shuffling through documents. "Morning, son," I said with an almost provocative calm. He didn't look up. "Are you staying home today?" he asked. "Yes, like always. Why?" "No reason, just asking." His voice was fake, his smile even faker. He closed his briefcase and hurried out. I waited a few minutes, and when I heard the car pull away, I walked over to the desk. The papers were there, and among them, an extra sheet. A sales contract drawn up without the bank's authorization. The buyer's name was one I didn't recognize, but the amount written in was obscene. My son had decided to sell the house under the table, hiding it from his wife and breaking the law. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a mix of sadness and triumph. I couldn't believe he had fallen this low. I took a picture of it with my old smartphone. That proof would be enough. That afternoon, I called Mark. "He did it," I said. "He tried to sell it without authorization?" "Yes, I have the documents." "Perfect," Mark replied. "As soon as he registers the attempted sale without bank validation, we activate the second clause, asset fraud." "What does that mean?" "It means he doesn't just lose all rights to the house, it means the bank can freeze his personal accounts for suspected money laundering." There was a silence. "Mark," I said, "isn't that too much?" "Too much? For someone who left you homeless, Frank?" His voice was grim. "Don't call it revenge, call it balance. Call." I hung up without answering. That word, balance, echoed in my head all day. That evening, Laura came home. She stormed in, throwing her purse on the sofa. "Where is Henry?" she demanded. "I don't know, dear. You don't know, or you don't want to tell me." "I don't know," I repeated calmly. She looked at me with those tired eyes, the kind a woman gets when she already senses betrayal. "I've noticed strange things. Calls, messages, hidden papers." "Maybe you should talk to him," I replied, not looking at her. "Oh, I will. But I have a feeling you know more than you're letting on, Mr. Miller." "I only know," I said in a low voice, "that the truth doesn't stay hidden forever, Laura. It always finds a way out, even when you're not looking for it." She held my gaze for a few seconds, then turned and went upstairs. The next morning, the ringing phone shattered the silence. It was Mark again. "Frank, the bank just received the automatic alert. The attempted sale was registered as fraud. Your son hasn't just lost all rights to the house, he is now officially under investigation." I closed my eyes. "So, it's done. It's done. But be ready. He's going to come for you." It didn't take long. At dusk, the doorbell rang, violently. I opened the door and saw him, disheveled, tie loose, eyes red. "It was you," he shouted, pushing past me. "Me?" I asked. "What did I do this time, son? You activated that damn clause. You talked to the bank. You ruined me." "I didn't activate anything," I answered, not moving. "I just waited." He stopped in front of me, breathing hard. "Dad," he said, trying to calm himself. "Listen, we can fix this. Just give me back control of the house." "Give you back?" I interrupted. "Son, the house was never yours." His eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking," I said slowly, "about how before I signed that transfer, I had my lawyer add an automatic reversion clause, and that clause just gave everything back to me." "No, that can't be," he yelled. "That's illegal." "No, Henry," I replied calmly. "What was illegal was what you did, trying to sell someone else's property and hiding it from your wife." The color drained from his face. For an instant, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who got terrified when he broke a vase. But this wasn't a broken vase. This was a broken life. "How could you?" he said, his voice cracking. "I could ask you the same question, son. I'm your blood." "And I'm your example," I replied. "Too bad you forgot that." Laura appeared on the staircase, her face pale. "What's going on?" she asked. Henry turned to her, speechless. I took a step forward. "Your husband tried to sell the house on his own, without telling you." She looked at him, horrified. "Is that true?" "Laura, Is it true, Henry?" she screamed. "Tell me." He just looked down. "Yes." Laura stood still for a second. Then she slapped him, so hard the echo filled the whole house. "You're just what your father said you were," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "A coward." She left. The front door slammed shut, and I, in silence, watched my son fall apart. I didn't say anything. Nothing else needed to be said. That night, I sat under the apple tree. The air smelled like damp earth, like justice. I looked at the branches and remembered something Rose used to say. The roots aren't visible, but they're what hold the tree up. I had been the roots, my son, the shadow. And now, finally, The light belonged to me again. The silence after a storm is crueler than the storm itself. That night, after Laura left, the house was so still I could hear the hallway clock ticking off each second like a wound. My son was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. In front of him, the papers he once thought were his victory were now his sentence. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, watching. Sometimes the best lesson isn't in the words, but in a look that needs no explanation. "Dad," he whispered, his voice broken, "I've lost everything." "No," I answered slowly. "You only lost what was never yours to begin with." He looked up, tears welling. "I didn't mean to." "No," I interrupted calmly. "Then what did you mean to do? Steal from me? Use me? Or just convince yourself that the years you lived in my shadow gave you the right to my house?" He didn't answer. He just lowered his head. His silence was more eloquent than any excuse. I sat down across from him. "Son," I said, "life has its own way of balancing the books. You took everything from me, thinking the old man wouldn't understand a thing. And look at you now. No wife, no money, no respect. The bank froze your accounts, didn't they?" He nodded, a tiny movement. "They also suspended you from your job, didn't they?" "Yes," he admitted, choking on a sob. "And Laura? She's not answering my calls." I sighed. I didn't feel pleasure. I felt pity, because no victory tastes sweet when the one who falls was once the most precious thing you had. The next few days were long and quiet. Henry barely left his room. I'd hear him moving around sometimes late at night, opening drawers, looking for something that wasn't physical. He was looking for comfort, maybe. Redemption. And even though a part of me wanted to hate him, another part, the oldest, most human part, couldn't. One afternoon, he came out to the backyard. I saw him standing in front of the apple tree, hands in his pockets. The wind was blowing his hair, just like when he was a kid. For a second, he looked just the same, with that innocence that time and ambition had ripped away. I approached him slowly. "Years ago," I said, "I planted that tree the day you were born." "I know," he answered without looking at me. "Your mother said it would be our witness, that it would grow up with you." "And it did," he said in a low voice. "It just grew up better than I did." I stayed quiet. That simple sentence hit me harder than any insult. It wasn't arrogance, it was regret. For the first time, I felt he was being sincere. "Dad," he said after a moment, "why don't you hate me?" "Because I've already suffered too much to waste the rest of my time on hate. Hate ages you faster than the years, son." He looked at me then, tears streaming down his face. "I failed you." "Yes," I admitted. "But failing me doesn't make you my enemy. It just makes you human." That night, as we ate dinner together for the first time in months, I realized something. Justice can give you back a house, but only forgiveness can rebuild a soul. And though my justice had been served, the emptiness his betrayal left behind couldn't be filled by laws or clauses, only by understanding. "Dad," he said, breaking a piece of bread, do you think I can change?" "I don't think so, son." He looked up, stunned. "No, I don't think. I know. Men change when shame turns into conscience, and you are finally starting to listen to yours." He smiled weakly. It was a sad smile, a broken one, but it was real. The days passed. The bank finished reversing the contract. Legally, everything was back in my name. Mark called to confirm. "Frank, it's done. The house is officially yours again." "Thank you, old friend," I said. "And your son?" "He's learning," I said simply. I hung up and looked around. Everything was the same, and yet everything was different. Every wall, every piece of furniture, every corner breathed with relief. Not because it was mine again, but because it had gotten its history back. It was no longer the house of resentment. It was the house of a lesson learned. One afternoon, I found Henry sitting on the stairs. He had a suitcase next to him. "You're leaving?" I asked. "Yeah, I need to get my life in order." "Where will you go?" "I don't know, but wherever it is, I need to start over." I nodded. "I'm glad to hear that." He stood up, hesitated for a moment, and then he hugged me. It was an awkward, short hug, but it was filled with all the years we both needed to get back. "Forgive me, Pop. There's nothing to forgive, son. Just promise me one thing. Don't ever confuse love with possession again. He pulled back, his eyes red. I promise. I watched him walk away down the path, his suitcase bumping against his leg, his shadow stretching long in the afternoon sun. And for the first time since this whole thing began, I felt peace. Not the peace of winning. The peace of being done with the fight. That night, I lit a candle in front of Rose's picture. The flame lit up her smiling face. "It's over, my love," I whispered. "Everything's back in its place. The boy fell, but not to be destroyed. He fell so he could learn how to get back up." I sat by the apple tree and wrote in my notebook. It wasn't the claws that saved me. It was my patience. The silence of a good man is worth more than the cries of a betrayed one. I looked up at the sky. The stars were bright, clean, as if the universe was agreeing with me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I slept without anger. It's been 3 months since Henry left. In that time, the house felt bigger, quieter, but not empty. It was as if the air itself had finally learned to rest within the walls. The apple tree bloomed again. Every morning, while I drank my coffee, I'd watch it from the window, lit by the sun. Its branches seemed to remind me that even something pruned by pain can blossom again. Mark came by to see me every now and then. He'd bring fresh bread. We'd talk about politics, about the weather, and sometimes about Henry. "Heard anything from him?" he asked one afternoon, looking over some papers. "Not a word." "And that doesn't worry you?" "It hurts, but it doesn't worry me. When you plant a seed, Mark, you can't force it to grow. You just have to trust that one day you'll see it sprout." He nodded in silence. He knew I wasn't just talking about my son. I was talking about myself. One night, while I was looking through an old photo album, the doorbell rang. It was late, almost 11. I thought it was a neighbor. But when I opened the door, the air left my lungs. It was Henry, thinner, with a few days' beard, his clothes worn. He had a different look in his eyes, not the look of a defeated man, but of someone who had finally looked in the mirror and didn't run from what he saw. "Hi, Pop." I didn't know what to say. "Hello, son. Can I come in?" I nodded silently. He walked in slowly, like someone stepping into a church. We sat at the dining room table. For several minutes, nobody spoke, just the tick-tock of the clock, filling the air. Finally, he broke the silence. "I got a job, at a workshop, a carpentry shop," he said. "Doesn't pay much, but I'm learning." "I'm glad to hear that." "I stopped drinking, and I've been going to therapy." "I'm glad to hear that, too." He rubbed his hands together, nervous. "I've been thinking a lot, about everything I did, about you, about Mom, about how I confused helping with weakness and pride with strength." His words were sincere. There was no drama, just truth. I watched him, calm. "Why did you come back, Henry?" "Because I need to ask for your forgiveness," he said, not looking at me. "Not to make me feel better, but because I can't move forward until I do." The lump in my throat was instant. For years I'd dreamed of hearing those words, but now that they were right in front of me, I didn't know what to do with them. "Pop," he continued, "when I took the house, I didn't do it out of malice. I did it out of fear. Fear of not being good enough, of not living up to what you were. And Laura, she pushed me, but the decision was mine. And now? Now I know that none of it was worth a damn if I didn't have your respect." I leaned forward, putting my hands on the table. "Respect isn't bought, Henry. It's built, and you tore it down, brick by brick, but if you're willing to rebuild it, I'll be here to help you." He looked up, surprised. "Are you forgiving me?" "Not entirely." "Then, why are you letting me stay?" "Because forgiveness, son, isn't given with words. It's proven with time." That night I let him sleep in his old room, the same one where he used to dream of being an engineer, the same one where he cried when his mother died. When I closed his door, I saw him lying there, staring at the ceiling, as if looking for answers in the cracked paint. I didn't say anything. I just turned off the light. In the middle of the night, I got up to use the bathroom and I heard him talking in his sleep. He was whispering my name. And Rose's. "I'm sorry," he said in his dreams. "Sorry." And those few words, so simple, healed more than any justice ever could. The following days were strangely peaceful. Henry got up early, worked in the backyard, made breakfast. He wasn't the same man who had betrayed me. He was someone different, quieter, more centered. The pride that used to fill his eyes had been replaced by humility. One morning, while we were watering the apple tree, he said, "You know, at the workshop the owner taught me something. The most beautiful pieces of wood are the ones with scars, I think. I think that's us." I smiled. "Yeah. But remember, son, the scars don't disappear. They just stop hurting." A week later, a letter came from the bank. I opened it carefully. It was a notification. The legal process was officially closed. I was once again the sole owner of the house. But strangely, as I read it, I didn't feel pride. I felt sad, because the victory didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that my son could look me in the eye again, without shame. "Pop," he said that night at dinner, "I want to give you something back." He took a small wooden box from his pocket. Inside were the wedding bands, the ones I'd sold years ago to help pay for his wedding. "I found them at a pawn shop," he explained. "Took me months to get them back." I set them on the table, my hand trembling. The shine was dull, but it was enough to make me remember Rose, her laugh, our hands together. "Thank you, son," I said, my voice breaking. "No, thank you, Pop, for not giving up on me." I couldn't sleep that night. I went out to the backyard, under the apple tree. The moon was like a blessing on the leaves. I looked up at Henry's window. The light was still on, and for the first time in so long, I felt the house breathe. In peace. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Regret doesn't erase the past, but it does redraw the lines, softer. And sometimes, that's enough to keep going." I closed the book. I blew out the candle and looked at the sky. I don't know if it was the wind or just my imagination, but I swear I heard Rose's voice whisper, "You can rest now, Frank. He understands." And finally, I did. They say old age is the soul's last classroom, and that only those who learn to forgive their own wounds get to graduate in peace. I used to think that getting old was about losing strength, losing memory, losing loved ones. But today, looking at the apple tree from my chair, I understand that getting old is also about winning. Winning calm, winning silence, winning the ability to look back without it hurting. Henry was still living with me, no longer as a guest or a guilty party, but as a son who had come home. Every morning he made breakfast before I even got up. The smell of fresh coffee filled the hall, and it reminded me of the days when Rose would hum old songs while making pancakes. It was as if time had finally given me back a piece of what it stole. Sometimes I'd watch him from a distance, tending the garden, fixing things around the house, helping the neighbors. And I'd think, maybe this is the real miracle of life. Watching something you thought was dead bloom again. One afternoon, he asked me to walk into town with him. We walked slowly, side by side. The sun was low, and the street smelled like fresh bread. He didn't say much, but his silence was full of gratitude. I bought some nails, and he stopped at a used bookstore. He came out with an old copy of The Little Prince. He handed it to me. "This was your favorite, wasn't it?" he said. "You used to read it to Mom when she was sick." "I know." I opened it, and on the first page, he had written a note. "For the man who taught me that what is essential isn't bought, it's built. Henry." I had to look away so he wouldn't see my eyes water. The days kept on their path. Time didn't weigh on me anymore. It just passed. Every evening, Henry and I would sit under the apple tree. He'd have a beer, I'd have my tea. We didn't talk much. At this age, you don't need to fill the silences. Sometimes, the silence itself is the most honest conversation. One evening, as the wind rustled the leaves, I said, "You know this is a legacy, son." "An inheritance?" "Not exactly. An inheritance is divided up. A legacy is passed down. The first one gets spent, the second one lasts." He looked at me, not quite understanding. "When I'm gone," I continued, "I don't want you to remember the things I gave you. I want you to remember the things I taught you. To not sell your conscience for comfort, to not confuse love with submission, and to understand that your dignity is non-negotiable." Henry nodded, his eyes shining. "I've learned that, Pop." No, not completely. You'll truly learn it the day you have a child of your own. and it hurts you to watch him make your same mistakes." He looked down, thinking, "I hope I don't fail him." "You will, son," I said tenderly. "We all fail. But if you do it from a place of love and not from a place of ego, there's always a way back." That night, I wrote something in my notebook that I still remember by heart. The greatest legacy a father can leave isn't a house or money or memories. It's the certainty that real love can survive betrayal. Because when forgiveness finally arrives, what was lost doesn't hurt anymore. It blossoms. I closed the notebook and left it on the table, next to the wedding bands Henry had returned to me. I looked at them for a long time. I thought of Rose, of her sweet voice telling me, "Don't be so hard on him, Frank. Children don't always hurt you out of malice. Sometimes they just do it out of fear." And I understood she'd been right all along. The next day, Henry asked permission to paint the front of the house. I said yes. For hours, I watched him go up and down the ladder, his face streaked with white paint, sweat on his brow. And I thought how symbolic it was, watching him cover the walls where the pain had lived, as if he were trying to erase the past with every brushstroke. When he finished, he sat next to me on the porch. "What do you think?" he asked, proud. "It doesn't look like the same house." "Exactly," he said, "and you don't look like the same father, and I'm not the same son." We both laughed. It was a clean laugh, with no shadows. And for the first time in so long, I felt the circle had closed. That night, at dinner, Henry looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. "Pop, I want you to know something," he said. "If anything ever happens to me, I want you to remember that you were the best father I could have ever had, the most patient, the strongest. And if I didn't tell you that before, it's because I had to lose you for a little while to understand how much I needed you." I sat in silence, swallowing the lump that was rising in my throat. "Son," I finally said, "the only thing I need to hear is that you forgive yourself." "I'm still working on it." "Then keep working," I said. "Forgiveness is a door that only opens from the inside." When he went to bed, I stood at the window, watching the streetlights. I thought about how much everything had changed. What started as a story of betrayal had ended as a story of redemption. And I understood that sometimes life doesn't take things away from us. It just forces us to see what we already had differently. I took my notebook one last time and wrote, "My legacy won't be my house. It will be my story. And if someone hears it, maybe they'll understand that even the most broken heart can beat again, if it learns to forgive." I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and let the silence fill the room. The apple tree was still there, firm and serene under the moon. And I, for the first time, felt like I didn't owe anything to anyone, not even to myself. That morning, I woke up before dawn. The silence was different, not the silence of routine, but that thick silence that announces an ending. The air was cold, but not uncomfortable. It held a kind of peace, as if the world was whispering to me, "You can rest today." I got up slowly, put on my gray coat, and went out to the backyard. The apple tree was covered in dew. The drops shined like diamonds on the leaves. I sat down under it, my notebook in my lap. I dreamed of Rose again. She told me the same thing she always did. "Don't go without leaving everything in order, Frank." And that's how I knew. It was time to write my last gift. I started the letter, my hand shaking, but firm. "Henry, my son. If you are reading this, it's because time has decided I can't talk to you face to face anymore. Don't cry. Don't blame yourself. Death isn't a punishment. It's just the rest for a soul that has finished its work. I want you to know that I never hated you. Not even the day you took my house. Not even when you called me a useless old man. Because a father who truly loves doesn't hold grudges. He holds on to hope. And I, son, I waited for you, even when I had no strength left. But there's something I never told you, something that needs to be said now. When I signed that contract at the bank, it wasn't a mistake. I knew exactly what I was doing. I'd read every line, every word, and yes, I included the clause that would protect me. But I didn't do it because I distrusted you. I did it because I knew your fears. I knew that sooner or later you would fall to the temptation to test me. And when you did, I wanted life itself to show you what really matters. Not the money, not the deeds, not the house, but the value of a home, of a history, of a good name. I gave you the chance to lose me so that you could learn how to find me. And you did. You came back. With tears. With humility. With truth. And that, my son, is worth more than all the riches in the world. So, this is my last gift. I've changed the will. The house, the account, and everything I own is in your name again. But this time, with no clauses. Not because I trust you blindly, but because I trust the man you've become. Take care of the apple tree. In every fruit it gives, you'll know I'm still here. In every shadow it casts, you'll find my forgiveness. Your mother and I love you, beyond all errors and all time. Your father, Frank. When I finished writing, I closed my eyes. The wind was blowing softly, carrying the smell of apples and damp earth. I stayed there for a while, listening to the birds sing and the slow crackle of the dawn. I didn't feel fear. I felt relief. Hours later, Henry found me, asleep on the bench in the backyard. I had the letter on my chest, the notebook open, and a peaceful smile on my face. He didn't cry at first. He just knelt in front of me, took my hands, and said in a low voice, "Thank you, Pop." He went inside. He sat and read the letter over and over until his tears blurred some of the ink. Then he went back out, looked at the apple tree, and spoke to the wind. "I promise I'll take care of everything, old man, even your silence." The days passed and the whole town came to my funeral. Mark read a few words that I had left for him. Frank Miller was a man who lost everything and got it all back without ever raising his voice. No one could hold back their tears. Henry planted 3 new apple trees next to the original one. He said each one represented something: regret, forgiveness, and memory. And every year, when they bloom, he gathers the apples and shares them with the neighbors with a little note that says, "From my father's tree," so you never forget that even something tart can turn sweet. They say that sometimes, when the afternoon fades, you can still hear my voice in the branches of the apple tree. They say it whispers things like, "It's okay, son," or "Keep going." And even though no one can prove it, I know it's true, because when love is pure, it never dies. It just changes its form. My house is still standing. The backyard is full of life. And on the dining room wall, where I once hung our first family photo, Henry placed my open notebook in a glass case. On the last page, in my shaky handwriting, it says, "I didn't leave. I just learned how to stay in a different way." And that's how my story ends, not with a shout or with revenge, but with a lesson, that even the most betrayed heart can leave a legacy of love if it learns how to forgive. The apple tree blossoms, the house breathes, and in some corner of this world, I know Rose is smiling, because the son who once broke our souls finally mended his own. Sometimes, time doesn't erase, it teaches. Forgiving wasn't forgetting what was done to me. It was releasing the weight of what I could no longer change. Today, I know that true love isn't measured by what it gives, but by what it leaves behind when it's gone. Tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. And tell me if you too have ever learned that to forgive isn't to give up. It's just to remember without the pain. Subscribe and join me for the next story, where I'll show you that even what is broken can bloom again.